To the monks, Lindisfarne was holy ground. To raiders watching from the sea, it was something else. Wealth with almost no defence. The island did not look dangerous that morning. It sat off the cold northeast coast of England near the kingdom of Northumbria. The tide moved around it. The wind moved over the roofs. Inside the monastery, men prayed. Other men copied words onto calfskin. Some guarded relics. Some prepared food. Some watched the animals. Some counted stores. Some worked with books that took years to make. Then ships appeared. Not a giant army. Not a Hollywood invasion with 10,000 men and a fireball every 5 seconds smaller, faster, meaner, in a practical way. The kind of attack that works because nobody believes it can happen until it is already happening. Now here is the part that should hit hard. Lindisfarne was not just a church. It was a spiritual center, a bank, a warehouse, a school, a political symbol, a famous shrine, a place where wealth moved in but armed protection did not match the value inside. To Christian Northumbria, it was protected by saints. To Scandinavian raiders, it was a target sitting on the edge of the sea. On June 8th in the year 793, this quiet island became one of the most famous crime scenes in medieval Europe. And no, we should not say this was the first Viking raid in history. That is too clean and too wrong. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle tells of 3 ships of Northmen landing on the coast of Wessex a few years earlier. A royal official went to meet them. He thought they were traders or strangers to be brought to the king. He ended up dead. There were also signs that English rulers had already started worrying about pagan seamen before Lindisfarne. But Lindisfarne was different. This was not some random coastal scuffle. This was an attack on one of the holiest places in the north of England. The Church of St. Cuthbert stood there. Cuthbert was not just a local holy man. He was one of the great saints of Northumbria. Pilgrims came because they believed his shrine had power. Kings and nobles gave gifts because that is what power did in that world. You gave to the holy place. You gained prestige. You gained prayers. You gained a connection to heaven and to politics on earth. That is the key. A monastery was not poor because monks lived simply. A monastery could be full of valuable things because other people used it to store meaning and status. Gold did not only sit in royal halls. Silver did not only move through markets. Precious metal also sat around altars. It decorated book covers. It shaped chalices. It wrapped relics. It turned faith into objects that could be lifted with 2 hands and carried away. The Vikings did not need to understand the theology. They understood the storage. Imagine standing on the deck of a narrow ship after crossing the North Sea. You do not see a modern bank with cameras and armed guards. You see low buildings near the shore. You see food. Animals. May be captives. You see men trained to read and pray, not men trained to form a shield wall at the beach. You see a place famous enough to hold treasure and isolated enough to be hit before help can arrive. That is not mystery. That is opportunity. The route was simple in the way dangerous routes often are. Somewhere across the Scandinavian world, men prepared ships built for fast water. We do not know their names. We do not know the exact harbor where they began. But the movement is easy to follow on a map from the Scandinavian side of the North Sea, across open water, toward the eastern coast of Britain, down toward Northumbria, past dangerous water and low sky, toward Holy Island near Bamberg. The sea was not a wall to these men. It was a road. For the people on shore, that idea was terrifying. Most kingdoms looked inland for danger, a rival king, a border raid, a rebel noble, a feud. A warband coming across fields. But ships changed the math. A ship could appear where no army was expected. It could land, strike, load up, lot. And by the time a local lord gathered men, the raiders could already be back on the water. That is why Lindisfarne mattered. It showed a new kind of threat in a way nobody could ignore. The monks were not stupid. They were not helpless children from a cartoon. That lazy version misses the point. Monasteries were serious institutions. They managed land. They stored food. They preserved books. They kept records. They trained educated men. They had political connections. They were part of how early medieval kingdoms remembered themselves. That is exactly why they were valuable. Lindisfarne had been founded in the year 635. King Oswald of Northumbria brought the Irish monk Aidan from Iona and gave him the island for a monastery. From there, the Christian mission spread across the north. The place became tied to royal authority and sacred memory. Later, St. Cuthbert lived there. He became bishop there. After his death in 687, his body became the center of a powerful cult. By 793, Lindisfarne was not some lonely hut for quiet men. It was famous, and fame is dangerous when fame tells raiders where treasure is. Think of a modern movie scene where thieves do not rob the empty house. They rob the place everybody knows has diamonds. That is the ugly logic here. The raiders did not have to search every building in Northumbria. Reputation did part of the work. Holy places attracted gifts. Gifts created wealth. Wealth attracted men who did not care about the holiness. That is why monasteries became perfect targets. First, they had portable wealth. A raider does not want a big stone building unless he plans to live there. He wants silver cups or gold fittings, small boxes, decorated crosses, coins, jewelry, fine cloth, tawdle weapons if there are any. Objects that can be carried to the ship and traded or melted later. Second, they had books. Today people hear book and think paper. Back then, a great gospel book could be a treasure object. The pages might be made from animal skin. The writing might take years. The cover might be decorated with metal and gems. The Lindisfarne Gospels were created there in the early 8th century and later became one of the most famous manuscripts from Anglo-Saxon England. The original jeweled cover was lost at some point in the age of raids. That detail alone tells you how raiders saw books. The words mattered to monks, the metal mattered to thieves. Third, they had food stores, grain, cheese, ale, salted meat, fish, animals. A raiding party needed supplies. A monastery was not only an altar, it was a living community with kitchens and barns and workers and land around it. Fourth, they had people. Captives could be sold. Skilled people could be valuable. Young people could be valuable. In the Viking world, raiding and slavery were connected. We do not need to turn this into fake fantasy cruelty. The real fact is enough. A coastal monastery could provide goods and human cargo in one stop. Fifth, they had limited defense. Some monasteries had walls or protected locations. Some had local ties. Some could call for help. But early raids moved faster than local defense systems. Lindisfarne was cut off by tide. It was reachable by sea. It sat near routes that a shallow ship could use. For raiders who needed speed more than a long battle, it made sense. Sixth, the attackers did not share the fear that protected Christian holy places in Christian minds. An English noble might hesitate to steal from a shrine because he believed punishment could come from God, or saints, or social disgrace. A pagan raider from across the sea did not live inside that same system. The invisible fence around the monastery did not stop him. That invisible fence is the whole story. To the monks, the church was not unguarded. It was guarded by God, guarded by St. Cuthbert, the guarded by sacred law, guarded by the belief that some things should not be touched. To the raiders, the door was still a door. When the attack came, the shock travelled farther than the ships. News reached Alcuin, a scholar from Northumbria who was living at the court of Charlemagne in Francia. That detail matters because it shows the story did not stay local. It moved through the elite Christian network of Europe. Alcuin heard that the holy place of St. Cuthbert had been attacked, and he was horrified. He asked a question that cut straight into the fear of the age. If St. Cuthbert and so many saints could not defend their own church, then what safety did any church in Britain have? That is the psychological explosion, because medieval Christians did not see only robbery here. They saw a break in the order of the world. The map in their heads had safe, sacred centers. There were dangerous borderlands and war zones. But a holy island with relics and prayers was supposed to be different. Lindisfarne told them it was not different enough. The ocean had reached the altar. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle gives the year a dark atmosphere. It talks about frightening signs over Northumbria, whirlwinds, lightning, fiery dragons in the sky, then famine, then the attack. Modern people can read that and go, okay, weather events.fair lalter memory.medievaldrama.fine, but do not miss what the chronicler is doing. He is saying this was not normal bad news. This felt cosmic to the people writing it down. In a Marvel movie, the sky cracks and everybody knows the third act started. In Northumbria, the chronicle gives you storms and famine and then ships, but the real horror did not need dragons. It needed geography. Lindisfarne sits close to the mainland, but the tide can cut it off. That makes it feel protected and exposed at the same time. It is an island when the water says so. It is a road when the water allows it. For monks, it offered separation from worldly noise. For raiders, it offered a landing point with limited escape options for the people inside. That is brutal geography. A monastery wanted quiet. Raiders wanted places quiet enough that nobody would stop them. And once somebody solved that equation, the pattern spread. The next year, the monastery at Jarrow was attacked. Jarrow was tied to the great scholar Bede. Then raiders struck Iona on the western side of Scotland. Iona was not random either. It was another island monastery with enormous religious importance. You can see the logic becoming a system. I find a coastal holy place. Strike quickly, take portable wealth. Leave before a kingdom can answer. This is where a lot of popular Viking content gets lazy. It turns every raid into pure rage. Horned helmets, screaming men. Monks running in every direction. You know the drill. Shows named Vikings and The Last Kingdom made the image famous. Those shows are fun. They also make everything feel personal and dramatic. But the colder truth is more disturbing. These raids were practical. A monastery was a soft target with hard value. The raiders did not need to hate Christianity to rob a church. Some probably did not care enough to hate it. Some may have enjoyed the insult. Some may have seen Christian objects only through foreign eyes. What we can say is simple. They knew the risk was low and the reward was high. That is why the raids kept happening. If you are building this scene in your head, do not start with chaos. Start with routine, a bell, a prayer. A man bending over a manuscript, another man checking a storage room, a younger monk carrying bread, a tide pulling back from the causeway, a grey line of sea, then sails. The first warning might not be a scream. It might be someone stopping work, because ships were not supposed to mean that. Ships could mean trade, theatres, messengers, fishermen, Mott's rangers asking for water. The earlier story from Wessex matters here. When 3 ships of Northmen arrived there, a royal reeve went out to deal with them, because he thought he could bring them to the king. He did not understand what kind of encounter he had walked into. That misunderstanding is the beginning of the Viking Age in English memory, not because nobody had ever fought before. England had plenty of violence, but because the sea started producing enemies who did not follow the old script. Lindisfarne made the lesson impossible to ignore. For the raiders, the timing was good. Early June meant better weather for sailing than winter. More daylight, easier movement. A fast crew could arrive with supplies and leave with cargo. The written sources do not give us a clean tactical report. No neat list of raiders. No leader name, no exact number we can trust. No camera angle. We have Christian witnesses and later writers who cared about meaning more than military detail. So we have to be careful. We know the raid happened. We know it shocked the Christian world. We know goods were taken. We know people were killed or captured, according to the sources. We know Alcuin wrote about it with fear and anger. We know the place survived for a time. We know the community of St. Cuthbert later moved inland under pressure from repeated raids. That is enough to tell the story without pretending we have a Netflix script from the raider captain. The honest version is stronger anyway. A small number of ships reached a famous holy island. They hit a community that had wealth but not enough armed defense. They carried away value. They left behind fear. Then the idea spread across Europe, not instantly in one meeting. Not because every Viking in Scandinavia got a memo, but because success teaches. That is the ugly business lesson of Lindisfarne. When a raid works, men talk. Cargo proves the story. Silver proves it. Captives prove it. A decorated cup in a hall across the sea proves it. Somebody asks where that came from. Somebody answers. Then somebody else remembers another monastery near another shore. This is how targets become categories. Before Lindisfarne, a monastery could think of itself mainly through sacred duty. After Lindisfarne, coastal monasteries had to think in border terms. Where is the nearest help? How fast can ships arrive? What should be hidden? What can be moved inland? What happens if the sea brings strangers? The sea had changed. And it was not only England. The same logic mattered across the Irish Sea, around Scotland, along the Frankish coast, up rivers. Anywhere there was wealth near navigable water. Viking ships were not magic, but they were efficient, shallow draft oars and sail, quick landing, quick withdrawal. They gave raiders a military and economic tool that coastal Europe was not ready to answer. A monastery with treasure near water was a standing invitation. Now there is a trap here. Some people hear this and think the monks were foolish for keeping valuables there. That is modern hindsight talking. In their world, gifts to a shrine were not just stored cash. They were public devotion. Religious duty. Elite status. Politics. A rich monastery meant influence. It meant books could be produced, guests could be fed, poor people could receive help, lands could be managed. Kings could connect themselves to holy power. So no, the monks did not accidentally build a treasure chest beside the sea for fun. They built a religious and economic center in a world where that made sense. Then a new threat exposed the physical weakness inside that system. That is the lesson: the sacred system worked only while enough people respected it. The Vikings did not. When Christian writers called the attackers heathens, they were not just describing religion. They were naming men outside the rules. Men who would cross the sea and touch what should never be touched. That word carried fear. It said these people do not care about our saints. They do not care about our altars. They do not care about our warnings. So what stops them? That question is much scarier than the raid itself. Because if nothing sacred stops them, then only walls, weapons, ships, men, alliances, ransom, tribute, an eventually organized military response can stop them. Welcome to the next 2 centuries of European coastal anxiety. The raid on Lindisfarne did not create every Viking ambition. Scandinavia already had trade networks, warrior culture, look politics, as competition. Ship technology, close across seas. Men already traveled, traded, fought, farmed, fished, explored. It is childish to reduce all Scandinavians to raiders, but raiding was one path to wealth and reputation. Lindisfarne showed how profitable that path could be when aimed at the right kind of target. And the right kind of target was not always a castle. Sometimes it was the quiet place. That is what makes this story feel so nasty. The monastery was attacked because it was valuable and vulnerable at the same time. Those 2 words explain half of medieval raiding. Valuable, vulnerable. If you want the most honest thumbnail text for the event, it is not just Vikings attack monks. It is Vikings discover the perfect target. And once that discovery happened, coastal Europe could not unlearn it. Think about the objects inside. A chalice used in worship. A silver cup from a church. A reliquary holding the remains or belongings of a saint, a decorated book cover. To the Christian community, these things carried sacred meaning. To a raider, they were metal, white, resale, Rhine. That is the collision. One side sees heaven. One side sees inventory. The line sounds harsh, but it is historically fair. The attackers did not need a theology degree. They needed eyes. They needed hands. They needed a ship waiting near shore. The monks could explain why a vessel mattered for the mass. The raiders could explain what silver buys. And after the attack, people tried to understand why God allowed it. That is another part modern viewers often miss. Alcuin did not only say this was terrible. He searched for sin. He asked whether the disaster meant divine punishment. That was not random guilt. It was how many educated Christians processed catastrophe. If the holy place fell, then something must be wrong. Maybe with the people, maybe with the kingdom, maybe with the age itself. That kind of thinking can tear a society open. A raid takes objects. The explanation can take confidence. If God allowed Lindisfarne to be hit, then the problem was not only military. It was spiritual, moral, political. This is why the event echoed so loudly. It was robbery and crisis at the same time. That was Lindisfarne. It told people the edges of the map were open. And for coastal monasteries, the fear became practical. You can pray and still move the treasure. You can trust saints and still build defenses. You can copy holy books and still watch the tide. Faith did not remove logistics. The Vikings forced Christian communities to learn that lesson in the hardest possible way. The community at Lindisfarne did not vanish that day. That matters. The easy story says, Vikings came and ended everything. Not true. Christian life continued there. The cult of St. Cuthbert survived. The memory survived. The community adapted. Later, under more pressure from raids, the monks left the island. They carried Cuthbert with them. They moved first in stages. They eventually settled at Chester-le Street and later Durham. That movement is a map of fear and survival. Picture that, men carrying the body of their saint away from the island that once felt protected. Not because faith died, because the coastline had become too dangerous. That image tells the whole age. The saint still mattered. The shrine still mattered. The books still mattered. But the sea could no longer be trusted, and the raiders knew it. After Lindisfarne, the coastline becomes a question mark. A sail on the horizon is no longer just a sail. It might be trade, it might be news, it might be men with blades and empty space in the ship for whatever they can carry. Every inlet becomes a possible door. Every monastery near water becomes a calculation. This is why the raid often marks the symbolic opening of the Viking Age in English memory. Not because Vikings suddenly appeared from nowhere. Not because every raid after it was identical, but because Lindisfarne gave the story a terrifying shape. Holy island, famous shrine, sudden ships. Stolen wealth. Shocked Europe. It is almost too clean. That is why we have to keep the nuance. The sources are mainly Christian. Many were written by monks or people close to monastic culture. They had every reason to describe the attackers in the darkest terms. The Vikings did not leave their own version of the Lindisfarne raid. We are hearing the scream from the injured side. That scream is real, but it is still one side of the record. So we challenge the easy myth. Were the Vikings demons from the north? No, they were human beings from societies with trade law, farming, five-foot ties, postries, struggles, and violence. Were the monks just innocent poor men with nothing worth stealing? No, they belonged to powerful institutions that held land, objects, and precious objects. Was Lindisfarne the first raid ever? No. Was it still one of the most important early Viking raids? Absolutely. Because history is not only about firsts, it is about the moment people realize what a thing means. Lindisfarne meant the sea had become a weapon. The Vikings did not just attack a monastery. They exposed a weakness in the Christian world. The weakness was not belief. It was the gap between sacred confidence and physical defense. A gap wide enough for ships to enter. And once men with ships discovered that gap, they kept looking for it. So when people talk about Lindisfarne marking the beginning of the Viking Age, do not hear only a calendar fact. Hear a psychological fact. This was the day one of the holiest places in England became proof that holiness could not stop a raiding crew. This was the seed stopped being background and became threat. This was the day a monastery became a target category that is darker than a simple battle scene. A battle gives you two armed sides. Lindisfarne gives you a world where one side thought sacred order had rules, and the other side did not belong to those rules. One side preserved books for eternity. The other side knew metal could be sold this year. One side built memory. The other side exploited access. And that is why the story still feels sharp more than 1,200 years later, because the raid was not only an act of destruction, it was a discovery. The Vikings learned that monasteries could be perfect targets, rich enough to reward the risk, soft enough to survive the strike, famous enough to contain treasures, isolated enough to delay rescue, sacred enough that local people may have assumed nobody would dare. Somebody dared. And after one famous island fell, the horizon itself changed. The Vikings did not just raid churches. They taught every coast in Europe to look at the horizon differently.